everyone. Very good morning to all of you. So today, me and my co-presenter Akash Chavda, we are going to make presentation on the first article of comparative literature, which is titled as "Why Comparative Indian Literature." So, first of all, comparative literary study, we all aware about that it is a academic field that involves the study of different literary texts, and it examines the interrelationships between different literary texts from different culture and genres. So comparative literature divided in four major schools. They are like German school, French, American, and British. The first one is German school that examines Johannes Gottfried von Herder's in 1778 through folk songs from diverse ethnic groups. The German school focused on thematology. The second one is French school. It initially emphasized influence studies, later involves into reception studies, focusing on how works are interpreted. The third one is American school. It expanded comparative literatures into an interdisciplinary field, linking it cultural context, and it emphasized process over product. The fourth last school is British school, and Matthew Arnold introduced the touchstone method for the comparative criticism. S.S. Praver proposed the ideas of placing in literature. This is the major idea of this last school. And if we see in Indian context, then Indian literature unified through the struggle of freedom and its quest of national identity. There are some key contribution from Indian literature. So now let's discuss the article. First of all, abstract. So Sisir Kumar Das examines comparative Indian literature as a distinct academic field, challenging Western-centric approaches while advocating for its validity. Das argues that India's multilingual literary tradition and historical cross-cultural interactions necessitate a comparative approach to studying its literature. He proposes a framework that transcends traditional nationalist and linguistic boundaries, emphasizing both interlinguistic and interlinguistic literary relationships within Indian literature, while arguing against narrow categorizations based solely on language or nationality. So now, in the earlier part of this article, there are major key arguments that given by Sisir Kumar Das. The first, Indian literature needs an unifying framework to overcome fragmentation caused by the linguistic division, and comparative Indian literature aims to explore connections between different Indian literatures. It balancing unity and diversity is crucial for a successful approach. Then inspiration from Welsh literature focuses on enduring works that transcend time and language. In Welsh literature, concept of Goethe's Welsh literature is also talking about that meaning of as a world literature. Developing an independent framework is essential to avoid Western biases, and broader scope for comparative studies should extend beyond linguistic and national boundaries. Then he addressing the historical neglect of Eastern literature and Western scholarship in crucial. Then thus also defining comparative within an Indian context is necessary. So while giving this argument, the major core idea of the early part of article are like Indian literature, despite its diverse language and cultural reflect a profound underlying unity. This is the major idea of the early part of that article, and for highlighting this part, he uses the word like multilingual literature. However, existing frameworks fail to capture the interconnectedness of these rich traditions. Then, comparative Indian literature offers a powerful method to explore the connection and influences between different Indian literature. Then, thus also highlight that drawing inspiration from the concept of world literature, we must focus on enduring work that transcend time and language rather than simply collecting all existing texts. Then he also examined that it is an imperative to develop a framework for comparative Indian literature that is distinct from Western approaches, addressing the historical neglect uh, of Eastern literature and Western scholarship. And in the last, he examined that our goal is not merely to compare but to foster a holistic appreciations of Indian literary achievements and transcending the limitations and linguistic and religion boundaries. So, by analyzing this article, my learning outcomes are like this. That understanding it involves understanding India's literary diversity, learns about interconnectedness themes across regions, break boundaries between religion and national literature, and promote cultural unity through literature, and gain a broader perspective on historical and social changes. Now, for the remaining part, I would like to request Akash Chawda.
Thank you, Akshay. Now, let us carry on this presentation with another set of key arguments by S.K. Das. First of all, S.K. Das says that comparative literature in West is primarily emerged as a comparative Western literature, and this study involves, by and large, the European literatures. And S.K. Das further critiques the European idea of Eurocentrism in comparative literature. And in this comparative Western literature, they also they also exclude the Oriental literature or the Eastern literature in general. Furthermore, he also says that this exclusion of the Oriental literature is not always driven by the what we can say is produces biases and prejudices, but sometimes it is also driven by pragmatism also. And the academic justification for this exclusion of the Oriental literature is given in this line that ahistorical parallels based on solely on speculations. And this exclusion of the Oriental literature, it is because a Westerner believes that the Oriental literature does not have the sufficient groundings, whether historical or cultural, and they are also based on the speculation. And further, if we take civilization as a criterion, which means a basis to do the comparative studies, then we can say that it is also problematic because Western people thinks that they are the only one who are civilized. The European countries, those white peoples are only the civilized people, and in that they remain ignorant of the Oriental literature. That is the thing. And if we talk about the comparative Western literature, then we can say that it is a study of two texts that belongs to the same nation. And one can argue that if we see the comparative Indian literature, then one may argue that it is a one national literature written in many languages. And also, S.K. Das says that comparative Indian literature is as valid as comparative Western literature, and we do not have to worry about that also. And India's multilingual reality makes its comparative literature a unique and a valid domain, similar as comparative Western literature. So let us see the core idea behind his arguments. S.K. Das advocates for a redefinition of comparative literature to address the limitation of Eurocentric and monolingual frameworks. The, the, limitations of the Eurocentric and monolingual frameworks. The limitation here is that the limitation is here is like just a minute. It is because of the same language, and he gives the example of American and British literature, because both the nations follows the similar kind of language, that is English. But yeah, comparatists do not study these kind of two language, and they do not consider it as a comparative study also. And he also says that neither language nor political boundaries nor culture can solely define the idea of national literature. And considering keeping these things in the mind, he also gives the two concept: intralinguistics and interlinguistic studies. Intralinguistics is kind of a study of similar languages, that is of American and British nation. And interlinguistics can be done in the country like India, where there is various languages and university diversity of the languages. Like we can do the comparative study between Hindi and Bangla, or Gujarati or Marathi or Tamil or Kannada. So in that way, though he says that language is not seemingly dependable, because it is not a foolproof, as it can serve as a medium of multiple literatures. For example, British and American. And this kind of criterion of language can also lead to the homogeneity of language also. But at the same time, Sisir Kumar Das says that this kind of homogeneity is is good, rather than having the civilization's homogeneity. And in this way, India challenges the traditional framework of the Western model of national literature. And S. K. Das also warns us against the potential parochialism in literary studies, whether it emerged from the East or West. He also gives the terminology of comparative Indian literature, and he does this not out of the anxiousness that there is something like comparative Western literature also. And Indian literature produced in various Indian languages provides a strong terra firma, or strong foundation for comparative studies, because, as I have said, that India has various languages, and they all form kind of a strong framework for doing the comparative studies. And subsequently, he also raises a question that will not the study of Indian literature alone breed a kind of literary patriotism or critical parochialism which must be avoided? Well, he says that this would lead to the parochialism, because we are here moving from comparative studies to the comparative Indian studies. Comparative study is a kind of a study of world literature, and on the other side, if we see the comparative Indian literature is a study of Indian nation, so wouldn't it lead to the parochialism? And in the answer he gives that he argues that this can be avoided. This parochialism can be avoided by embracing the diversity of Indian languages and interconnectedness of the Indian literature and the relationship with the other literary traditions also. And from the history, we can see that Indian literature has influenced and has been influenced by the many other languages and many other literary traditions also. India has given birth to the languages like Urdu, and in the history also, the Sanskrit plays have been translated and been read by the various other literary disciplines also. And there is also kind of a still gap remains in doing the comparative studies. Like there is comparative study has not been very much explored in the context of India and China, or India and Greece also. So in that way, India is not merely Indian, because Indian literature has influenced many other literary traditions, and it is also been influenced by many other also. And at the later part, at the end of the article, Sisir Kumar Das also mentions Amiya Dev, who says in his article towards a comparative Indian literature that comparison is the right reason for us because one, we are multilingual, and two, we are the third world. While keeping in mind our colonial history, we have to also look, while doing the comparative studies, we also have to look that where are we, where are our location, and we also have to keep in mind our socio-political implications also. And in that, keeping these things in the mind, we have to do the re-evaluation and the modification of the Western concept like influence. And influence in this way, in colonial context, kind of a derogatory words can be. So we have to redefine that also. And towards the conclusion, we can say that the solution lies in the Indian scholars critically examining their own literary traditions and shedding our all colonial prejudices and psychological restriction, and engaging with the world literature without any kind of biases. And we have to look and critically examine our own Indian literature, and that is from within that. And journey is not from comparative literature to comparative Indian literature, but from comparative Indian literature to comparative literature. So my learning outcome would be the first of all, that I need to revisit my old comparative literature, comparative study presentation, because I have till now given two presentations on comparative studies, and I had the very narrow notion of comparative studies, because in those presentations, what I have done is just to highlight various similarities and dissimilarities of the two particular texts. But after learning this article and comparative literature in general, I get to know about that. No, comparative literature is not something that it requires a deeper study, not just the similarities and dissimilarities. So that is one thing. And another thing about the relationship between the language, nationality, and literary traditions, that how these things go hand in hand, and how these things are also complicated in their own manner. And also the relationship between the Western and Indian literary tradition, whether it is historically or it is till now also. So these are the references, and I also want to acknowledge that Akshay and I have used ChatGPT to simplify this article's language, and also to gain deeper understanding of this article also. And thank you. Now you can ask any questions.
Akash, my question in your presentation, you have mentioned two terms, influence and reception. What is the key difference between the two terms in the context of Indian comparative schools?
Yes, these two terms, influence and reception, comes from the French school of comparative study. And in the context of India, where I have mentioned about the Amia Dev's article, in which he says that we have to reevaluate both the terms, because French school has used these terms in their context, and we have to see and locate these terms and reevaluate this term in our colonial context. So in our colonial context, we have to see that influence is sometimes used as a pejorative terms, because in my understanding, I can say that the influence is kind of an influence of our masters, and we can at one point consider good, because reception, many of the Indian writers have gained their inspiration from the Western writings also. So in that way, but in any case, we have to reevaluate this framework in the context of India.
Okay. Is there anybody else? Second question. Yeah. Okay. Unnati is there.
So how does comparative Indian literature, according to you, contribute to understanding Indian history?
Yes, as I have mentioned in the presentation also, that Indian history of just a minute. Yes, here he also says that this kind of things to focus on the Indian comparative Indian studies would not lead to the parochialism or patriotism. Well, this answer we can see in the history of India, and as I have mentioned that Indian history, Indian literary tradition has been influenced by many other literary traditions also. So in that way, our history is also rich and diverse. So in that way, we can say that it can be used good. So sorry, I am not able to give proper answer, but I will see that.